Hello, everybody. This is your favorite Bronze Age comic book podcast, Flea Market Fantasy. This is your co-host, Mike L. And as always, I'm joined by
Michael Dell of the LCS Hockey Radio Show.
That's right. And this week is another special episode because we're doing Doctor Who. And so we've got a special guest, right? Michael, can you introduce us again?
Yes, but first, let me just apologize to all our listeners that I am sorry that I continue to let Michael pick books.
You're a real wet blanket, aren't you, Mike Dell?
Doctor Who.
I mean, hey, it's no champions, but... Huh?
No one in this issue gets punched.
Yeah.
And right away, I'm out. I don't like it.
But, I mean, we could have done champions.
Batman punches people all the time, and you hate him, too.
Yeah, that's true. I don't like the Batman. But there you go. You hear our guest this evening, the first person to be making a return visit to Flea Market Fantasy. He is an author. Is a 3-time winner of the Best Independent Book Award for his novels Cage Life, Knuckle Down, and Sinner's Cross. My bestest writing chum, Miles Watson.
Hello, audience.
There he is, Miles Watson. And you can go buy his books at Amazon or 19books.com. Load up. You know, Mike L., since I mentioned he's a 3-time winner of the Best Independent Book Award, you know, I've also won that award. So you're the only person on the show who has not won that award. And I guess what I'm saying is you need to get cracking.
That's shameful, yeah.
Start writing some books. Let's go.
I have written screenplays, but I've only finished 2 out of the 4 I've started, so...
Oh, that's 50%. It's not
bad. Yeah, not bad.
Screenplay.
Now, were any of these quote-unquote screenplays Doctor Who fan fiction?
No, but I wish they were. Looking back, that's what I should have done with my life.
Now, the reason why I invited Miles, and Miles, I apologize for bringing you on to talk Doctor Who, but apparently you actually like Doctor Who. Is that right?
I grew up watching what I guess it's now known as classic Doctor Who. When I was a kid, my mom introduced me when I was still like very, very young to the 3rd Doctor played by John Pertwee, which was apparently on rotation on some television station in Chicago. And when I was about 9, she discovered that the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker, who's generally considered to be the greatest of all the people that have ever played him, either before or in the new incarnation that's been going on for, I guess, like 15 years now. She introduced me to that when this would have been, I'm dating myself here, but this would have been about 1980, give or take, I want to say, is when I was introduced, 1980, 81, something like that. So I wouldn't say that I'm a Doctor Who fan exactly. I would say that I'm a fan of the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker. I've watched several of the others. I've watched some of the new stuff. There's good stuff to be found there, but the guy I grew up with, it's kind of like some people feel about James Bond. Like if you grew up with Roger Moore, he's your Bond. If you grew up with Sean Connery, he's your Bond. There's a generation that grew up with Daniel Craig, et cetera, and so on. So
now, I don't know anything about Doctor Who, but Tom Baker, was he the guy with the curly hair and the scarf?
Yes.
Okay.
He played it longer than anybody ever has, from 74 to 81.
All right. See, that's who I think of when I think Doctor Who. I think of that guy. All right. Well, let's give people some background here. Well, Michael, what's your association with Doctor Who, Michael?
So I did not grow up with it, but a good friend of mine was always raving about it because it was also on. I think it was actually on TV in Canada first, as far as I know. And a friend of mine was always talking about it. And I had never seen it, but I knew its reputation for its really cheap special effects. But I also knew there was a lot of people that grew up loving it, and so. Maybe, I think it was after the new show had already started, I decided I was going to get into it. So I went back and watched some of the old shows on DVD, and I just loved it, right? And then I've watched the entire new show, and while I do think some of it's really good, I think there's a magic to the old show. There's a magic, from the old show that's been lost. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I'm not. My brother claims that I'm a complete reactionary and I hate everything that's new and only like things that are old. And that's probably true. But in this case, I agree with that statement just on the basis of there's a certain magic to a low budget show that because the budget was so low, especially in the 70s and the early 80s, it kept getting cut, and there was terrible inflation in Britain. And they had all kinds of problems with censorship, even though the show was hardly violent by American standards.
Mm-hmm.
So they managed to accomplish something kind of in spite of these tremendous obstacles that forced them to concentrate on dialogue, character, and story, rather than special effects and all that kind of what they'd call bits and bobs in Britain, all that kind of extra flash, all the flashy stuff that sells science fiction usually is the special effects and the warships and the, clanking robots and everything. And the special effects for Doctor Who, I mean, even as a kid, I ridiculed them. I mean, even as like an 8-year-old. Yeah. But that's part of what made it fun. The classic Doctor Who was that they had to work around these ghastly budget limitations that they had.
Right.
So just like radio back in the day, old, golden age of radio, they had to concentrate on dialogue and story because they didn't have a visual medium. Well, Doctor Who is somewhat similar because the visual medium is challenged. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So let's give some background to Doctor Who. Like I said, I knew my only experience with Doctor Who is as a little kid flipping through the channels, seeing it there and going, what the fuck is this? And turning the channel as quickly as I could. That was my only experience.
Because you're a hate-filled freak.
But it was a BBC created program over there in England, and it was created by Sidney Newman, C.E. Weber, and Donald Wilson, who all worked for the BBC and the TV department and whatnot. The original run was from 1963 to 1989, and it was revived in 2005. It premiered on November 23rd, 1963, just one day after JFK's assassination. How about that? That's interesting.
Very true.
The Doctor is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey. Michael, would you like to explain that?
What's funny is I believe it's Gallifrey, but
I'm sorry.
Gallifrey has been rarely seen in the new show, so I don't know much about it. I just know that that's the Doctor's home planet where all the Time Lords come from. I don't even know what to explain about it beyond that, other than it's kind of like it's to the Doctor what Krypton is to Superman, but it didn't. At the time, it didn't. There was nothing. It was still there. Now, in between the old show and the new show, I'm not sure if you know this, Mike Dell, but the new show has picked up the continuity of the old show. So they still reference the old show. That's just different incarnations of the Doctor, right? So in between the old show and the new show, which was, I think it was a 25-year gap, there was a time war, and Gallifrey was kind of lost for a while. Now it's back. Then it was destroyed. So beyond that, there's not really much I know about it. Miles might know more.
It was a 16-year gap, by the way. 16.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, the basic idea is what he said. I mean, in the Gallifrey was never really that important to the story of Doctor Who. It just basically was an origin point. The Time Lords are something that Doctor Who, the character of the Doctor, has renounced. Basically, in the original series, he's a fugitive. He's basically a bum running around the galaxy in a stolen ship, getting into all kinds of mischief. He's kind of an anarchist. He fights for sort of liberty causes wherever he goes, opposing evil, but he's kind of his own person. He's technically a Time Lord, but he's really a fugitive. He's not really welcome there. So he's very similar in some ways. The Time Lords are very similar in some ways to, in the Marvel Universe, the Watcher.
Oh, okay.
In the sense that they're kind of above and beyond all the galaxy BS that's going on, the wars and the conflicts and trade and all that. They've mastered time travel. They're millions of years ahead of pretty much everybody else. And so they sit back and do their own thing, observing, recording, and not really interfering too much with the universe, kind of ducking out of the way of everything. And eventually they get so sort of soft and decayed because they've been playing it safe that they become vulnerable, and like every other kind of great civilization, they start to crumble. And I guess that's part of the plot that happened in the interregnum period between the old show and the new show, is that the Time Lords sort of toppled somewhat, kind of victims of their own too long being successful and out of the game.
Well, I kind of like that better, knowing that Doctor Who's a rebel. And he,
Oh yeah,
rebelled
yeah,
against
yeah.
the
He's
Time Lords.
definitely not an agent, a willing agent. In fact, they kidnap him several times in Tom Baker's run and basically extort him into doing things for them, and he can't stand them and insults them constantly, and is basically thrown off the planet on the rare occasions he does go there. He's not popular.
Is that planet like an Earth-like planet, or is it all weird and strange?
It's very rarely depicted. It's a very stratified society with a real stuffy kind of hidebound. It's sort of a take on the British aristocracy and ruling class. You know, these very stuffy, powerful, elderly people that have massive power but no real imagination, and they're very traditionalist, and they don't like to upset the apple cart, and they kind of want things to go on forever the way they're going now. And so they use him as kind of, when they don't want to get their hands dirty, sometimes they'll shove him in to a situation, but for the most part, he's considered to be a criminal.
And these Time Lords are like a human being body, or okay, because
Time Lords look like people, but every period of time they're allowed a certain. They probably tweaked the formula because, for obvious reasons, the show keeps going on. But it used to be that a Time Lord got 12 regenerations, so he had 12 lives.
Oh, okay.
So they lived to be very old, like 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old before they finally died, because they could regenerate, which is why you have all these different doctors. In the original run of Doctor Who, you had 7 guys play the role.
Yes.
And that encompassed about 900 years, supposedly, of time of his lifetime. As far as the new stuff goes, I don't know what they're on now. They're probably on like 15 or something.
I think 17 or something. Or
okay.
No, what is it?
No, I think
13,
it's actually 13. Yeah.
13. Yeah.
So I think they've discarded the whole 12 regenerations as the end thing, but that was the original premise, was you got 12 bites at the apple. Every time you reincarnated, basically, you kept your personality changed along with your looks. So they kept the memories, but they changed as people somewhat. And then they have, every once in a while in Doctor Who, they would do a special called like the 2 Doctors, the 3 Doctors, the 5 Doctors, where they would unite all the living actors in one story. And it turns out that the doctors, when they interact with each other, can't stand each other, which is kind of funny, because their personalities are kind of different. So it's an interesting premise, because they mess a lot with our conception of linear time.
They're Time Lords.
Yeah, they're Time Lords.
And you also mentioned he flies around in a ship, and that ship is depicted as an old British telephone booth, right?
Police box.
Yeah.
Oh, a police box?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It's different than a telephone booth?
Yeah, I believe, as far as I know, it used to be, and I think they had this in the States too, where when you wanted to call the police, you would step into this thing and just call them. And am I correct?
I think it might be, if memory serves, I used to know this, but if memory serves, a police box was something that a police officer could use when he was on his beat. He could open it up, and it had like a phone, and it also kept you out of the rain for a minute. If it was like a downpour, you could duck in it. And it had like maybe some like clipboards and stuff like that. Like it had a little bit, like you couldn't sit down in it or anything like that, I don't believe, or lie down in it. But it was basically like a little mini office / refuge for the London police, and they could go duck in there. I've also heard a different explanation, that it was like the old school public phones, like you just said, that if you needed a police officer, you could pick it up and it would ring a line directly to the station. Both might be true. It might have been one of those things that was open to the public as well. I honestly don't know. They were already outdated, I believe, when the show debuted.
Well, I just to cut aside for a second, I know that when I watched the old 1940s Batman serials, you guys are familiar with these? Yeah. I believe they had an American version of a police box, but it looked more like, like, what are they called? Not phone booths, but the phone booths from like the 90s where there was just like, a phone with like glass around it. It was more like that, where a police box in the States was kind of just the phone, as far as I know.
Well, in the old days, I can speak about the U.S. In the old days, cops would, like on telephone poles, there'd be a box. Like if you ever watched Top Cat, remember that cartoon Top Cat?
Barely, not really, but
Well, I think you could see it used there, but just a metal box on telephone pole, and the cops would have a key or a way to open it, and they could open it and then call the precinct.
okay, there you go. Yeah.
That's the way that works.
It says it's a public telephone kiosk or call box for use of the members of the police force, and that the blue light on top, was the signal that you were supposed to go in there and call the station. It had a direct line to the station.
All right.
And it says use for police officers to read and fill reports, take meal breaks, and even temporarily hold detainees until the arrival of transport.
Nice.
About the size of a closet.
Yeah, so even though the ship is depicted as a phone booth, police box, closet, whatever, it's actually larger once you're inside.
Yeah.
It's like a big ship once you're. Now, how big of a ship is it inside, Michael? Is it like,
Well, I don't know. Like in the old show, to my knowledge, it was like the size of like a living room, but there might have been other compartments or hallways.
Yeah. The control room was like the size of a living room, but the TARDIS, the ship, the TARDIS is massive. Like on the inside, it was like they never truly reveal it, but basically he says it's, it could be as big as the inside of a pyramid. There's one episode where they actually explore the ship, and it's got like drawing rooms, swimming pools, an alternate community, alternate control room.
Yeah.
It's huge. Like it's got these, it's gigantic. It's massive. It's like a whole building basically, or an entire large ship.
Now, Miles, you mentioned the name is the TARDIS, TARDIS. Do you know what that stands for?
Time and relative dimensions in space.
Don't fuck with Miles Watson and Doctor Who. He knows his stuff.
I didn't realize I knew that till you asked.
So like we mentioned, 13 doctors. They all play the same soul, but in different bodies. And the story we'll be reviewing today, Michael, depicts the 7th Doctor, who was played by an actor named Sylvester McCoy.
Yes.
And I guess his distinguishing characteristic is he wears like a little straw hat.
Yes.
A little hat. I don't know.
He was the last. Yes, he was the last Doctor of the original show. Correct. Yes.
Yes, I think that is correct.
Yes. Yeah.
Marvel UK published Doctor Who Weekly in 1979, and it eventually became Doctor Who Magazine, and Marvel kept publishing it until 1995 when Panini Comics took over. What can you tell us about Panini Comics, Michael? I'm sure you're a big fan.
I have no freaking idea.
Well, they're still publishing Doctor Who Magazine today. And the issue we're going to be discussing was Doctor Who Magazine issue 139 from 1988. And why did you pick this issue? Actually, it's just a story, right, Michael? You only wanted us to read one little story.
Exactly, yes. It's one story from this magazine because the magazine also contained, articles and games and whatever else for readers. The reason I picked this issue is because it's one of only, I believe, 4 Doctor Who stories written by Grant Morrison.
I believe he only wrote 3.
Okay.
He wrote 3, yeah. He wrote 3 stories from 86 to 88. One a year. 86 to 88.
Okay. So now, Miles, are you familiar with Grant Morrison?
No, I'm not, actually.
Well, as far as, 80s comics, he came in in the UK, he was writing comics from 78 on. But in America, he's most famous in the 80s for writing Arkham Asylum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what made him famous. Yeah, and
I know storylines sometimes better than, this is stupid as a writer, but I often know, storylines better than authors, which is, even as I say that, that's embarrassing. But.
Sure, no, understandable though. But no, basically after he did that, it kind of made him, rich and famous. And then he went on to do stuff like Animal Man and Doom Patrol and The Invisibles. And then in the 2000s, he became one of the biggest mainstream superhero writers, doing All-Star Superman and New X-Men and stuff like that. And so, I don't know, in my opinion, he's probably my second favorite writer after Alan Moore, in my opinion.
Okay. And interestingly enough, Miles, Alan Moore and Grant Morrison have a blood feud. They hate each other.
Yes.
Really?
And they're Michael's 2 favorite writers. Because it all gets into magic, Miles. Magic. They're both magicians, they claim.
What?
This is true.
Yeah.
Well, magician feuds can be vicious. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, we'll get into that later because I got some info on that I need to talk about. All right. So, All right, so let's get to this story, Michael. It's you mentioned it was written by Grant Morrison and drawn by a fellow named Bryan Hitch, who we'll talk about after.
Sure.
So why don't you describe what's going on here in this? It's only like what, 8 pages, 9 pages?
It's only 8 pages. It's only 8 pages. So we start off with looks to be like I guess you'd call these like, they look like blood vessels or one-celled creatures traveling through some type of, liquid medium, and it's supposed to be a mystery of what they are. So they're talking to each other, and they're using these Morrisonian words like syntelligence, and I'm sure there's other ones that are coming later. But they're basically talking to each other, and they're referring to these invaders from outer space that have brought annihilation and madness to our calm tunnel oceans. That's a key hint right there, tunnel oceans, right? And so they're traveling along, and they're kind of worried about this threat that's come. And basically, then we get the title here, Culture Shock. And, everywhere, the invaders are everywhere. And we're thinking, okay, what's going on? So we see these little, I don't know, sort of spider-like creatures that appear to be attacking them. And then we cut to the next page, and we see the TARDIS materializing on top of like a cliff by like a beach. And the Seventh Doctor comes out, and he's basically, kind of just ruminating on what's going on with his life and what's the point of it all and blah, blah, blah. And so he kind of just sits down on the rock and is like kind of watching the sunset or the sunrise here. And he's just chilling out, talking to himself, basically.
Yeah, he's wondering if it's time to hang it up, but he's too old to be doing this.
Right.
Might be time to retire.
Yeah, he's like, he's talking to the TARDIS. He's like, you're almost as old and useless as I am. Maybe it's time to go home for good, right? So who knows? For all we know, this could have been the last Doctor Who comic book, right?
So close, but
so anyway, we cut back into this other, subplot, or the main plot, I guess, and we see again these cells or whatever they are talking to each other, and I don't know how much detail you want to get into this cool language here, but they're talking about the luminous architecture of the protein shells glitters with a fathomless lust. We flee through the tides of the world water towards the heart of the home body. And this looks kind of like, I don't know, like if it's supposed to be a heart. Yeah, I guess it would be a heart, right? And they're talking. And so now the syntelligence speaks. And basically, this is supposed to be kind of like a hive mind of these things. And it's talking. It's like the invaders have damaged the home body beyond repair. So you're thinking, well, what's home body? What does this all mean? We are all that remains of the culture. Let we reach out beyond the home body into outer space. Let we touch the skin of infinity, right? So then we cut back out to the Doctor, and the Doctor's like, did you hear that? It sounded like a telepathic cry for help. And he doesn't know where this voice is coming from. So he leaves his cliff, and he kind of skids down the edge of this cliff here, and he comes down, and we see what looks like sort of a purple dinosaur. Kind of chilling out on this beach, and he thinks that the dinosaur is talking to him. She's like, wait, I don't understand. And the voices are talking, and they're like, are you not the overbody? And he's like, no, what are you? What you see is simply our home body, our transport. We are this intelligence of the culture. And then it's sort of this intelligent, these cells or whatever, they kind of mind meld, for lack of a better term, with the Doctor. And his mind sort of appears in this heart inside the body, and basically they're explaining to him what's going on, and back and forth. He's like, "Well, I'm the Doctor," and they're like, "What is I'm? How can you be what you are, a sentient home body?" So we're getting the idea that these cells don't understand how, an animal or whatever can be sentient and have only a single consciousness. So the Doctor's like, the culture, of course, your cell culture. And this intelligence is some sort of mass mind, and you're under attack from a virus. So now we realize what's going on. This whole time, these things have been inside this body, sort of talking to each other and narrating the story. So anyway, so then the Doctor gets an idea, and he's like, he starts running out. Wait, where is he running now? So yeah, we don't know where he's running yet. So then we cut back in.
Well, he's running back to the TARDIS.
Oh, that's right. Well, yeah, but that's a mystery, though. We don't know that yet, right?
No, it's obvious. Where else is he going to run? 7-Eleven?
Yeah,
He's
maybe.
TARDIS.
Who knows? You never know, right? You never know with the Doctor. So anyway, so we cut back into the body, and they're kind of talking about what's going on here. And we're like, we feel this intelligence disintegrate, its boundaries collapse into the meaningless formulae in the face of apocalypse. And then, and so then all of a sudden, these invaders start to die off. And we suddenly realize that it is dead. All of them are dead. And we hear once more the voice of our Redeemer. And of course, they're referring to the Doctor. And they cut back out to the outside world, and the Doctor is holding a syringe. I thought that might do the trick. Maxin Judicia. It never fails, right?
Yes.
So then he takes this little dinosaur and puts it in the ocean. And then basically we see that these little cell things are leaving the body and going into the ocean, right? Our awareness explodes into the dimensionless mythic space. We know union with the overbody, with the infinite primal ocean. Joyously, we divide and replicate and broadcast our thanks to the Redeemer, to the Doctor. So then basically the Doctor's faith has been restored. He's like, well, and he walks back to the TARDIS. He's like, well, don't just sit here. We've got people to see, places to go, things to do. And then he vanishes, and then he's off to his next adventure. There you go.
Yes. The Doctor is rejuvenated by healing the pink dinosaur of coronavirus.
That's right.
And then they start soaring through the universe in a phone booth.
I should point out, this story is more timely than I realized when I picked it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
In my version of the story, though, the Doctor's schizophrenic. He's just hearing voices, and then he shoots up a pink dinosaur with heroin and drowns him in the ocean. That's my take on it.
What's your take on it, eh? Huh.
But Miles, what did you think of this riveting story?
I had to read it a couple of times, but I actually ended up liking it. Doctor Who is a more difficult concept to. It's a more difficult format for a comic book than I think the vast majority of pick any TV show really, like T.J. Hooker. You know what I mean? Like you could make a T.J. Hooker comic book.
I would love a T.J. Hooker comic book. Let's make it happen.
I'm all about it.
Let's make it happen.
But those are very linear. They're very like, okay, there's socks on the jaw, there's car chases, there's some pithy dialogue, blah, blah, blah. We move on to the next chase scene or whatever. Doctor Who has a lot of action, but the character in and of itself, just being what it is, he does not, as a rule, like he can fight, he can blow things up, he does occasionally, but he's not somebody that shoots his way out of situations or punches his way out of situations unless he absolutely has to. Doctor Who is very much a cerebral character in the sense that he thinks his way out of situations in preference to killing his way out of situations. He's not that guy. Mm-hmm. So to some extent, I believe that making a comic book of Doctor Who is a bigger challenge. It's not impossible, and these stories are I read several of them from this comic. They're unusual with their choice of, like purple dinosaurs and talking penguins and shit like that. But that's because that's not the Doctor that I know. Like those stories, as a rule, they're some out there stories in Doctor Who for sure, especially during the lower points of the series. But I kind of liked the story because you have a character who's, functionally he's immortal. He lives like 2,000 years. So what are you going to do? He's this vagabond. He's having a moment of doubt. He thinks he should pack it in and go conform and maybe go home and sell out to this boring social order where nothing changes. And then he realizes that he's kind of needed because he travels around the universe being a do-gooder. And it was clever, clever plot, having this sort of intelligence that's a group intelligence, collective intelligence that has being invaded by a virus. Considering the difficulty of translating this medium to comics, I was impressed by it to a degree. I had to read it a couple of times to really get it, but I kind of liked it.
It's fine. It is what it is. It's 8 pages. Can't do a whole lot in 8 pages.
No, I mean, that's you'd be hard-pressed to do anything in 8 pages.
I mean, it has a little hook, a moment of doubt, and he's, born again by the end. So, whatever. Mike L., what'd you think of this?
Why don't you take a guess, Mike Dell?
You love it. You think it's the greatest thing ever.
Of course. No, I do love it. I mean, it also depends on how much I mean, we all have our favorite writers, and Grant Morrison is one of my favorites, and this is certainly something he would do. It's also very similar to something Alan Moore would do. Like Alan Moore has done a handful of Green Lantern stories, and as far as I can remember, and none of them really feature Hal Jordan. They're always about these weird other aliens that have like I remember there's a Green Lantern story where it was based on giving a ring to a being that I think there was no light in their part of the galaxy, so they had to rethink the whole concept of having a lantern, and they didn't understand the concept of color, so they had to change the oath and all this stuff. So again, very cerebral science fiction, not action, not fisticuffs, right? And so in that regard, I love this. I mean, you could argue that Grant Morrison probably just thought of the story first and then stuck the Doctor in it, right? Like you could definitely argue that. But like you said, to fill 8 pages, I think it's fine. I think it's great.
Yeah,
I mean, like fine. You said, like Mike said, 8 pages that's difficult to do a story for, because if we're talking about the T.J. Hooker style of storytelling, we don't really have to worry, right?
Right.
So we don't have to worry about that because just have him sock somebody on the jaw. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. But with the Doctor, where it's science fiction and the fans have a higher expectation, by my way of thinking, the fans have a higher expectation of stories. He can't just come in and, kick somebody's ass and that's a story.
Right. And they also can't pass it. They can't pass the buck to the next chapter or the next writer because, and this is the thing about comics from the UK at this time, is most of them were written like this with these shorter 8-page stories or whatever, 12-page stories with much smaller panels, right, and more condensed storytelling. So, there was a lot of anthologies at the time. Like there was one called, I think it was called Time Something or Time Twisters or something, where every story was a time travel story. And so a lot of these writers like Grant Morrison and Alan Moore and probably Garth Ennis and Neil Gaiman, they kind of cut their teeth just churning out these short stories, right? Whereas the American writers, they would get into comics by just sort of like me and Mike Dell have been talking about, you're 19 years old, you can write Spider-Man. You're 13 years old, you can write Legion of Superheroes. It's kind of easier to break in, I would say, to the American industry, I assume. So,
at least back then.
Yeah, at least back then. Maybe not now.
Yeah, 70s, late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But so all right, the artist here is Bryan Hitch.
Yes.
And Michael, I have no history with Bryan Hitch before this, but he was born in England in 1970. He got his first professional commission in comics when he was 17. And this was his only Doctor Who story, and he was 18 here when he did this.
Wow, okay.
18. He's probably best known for doing 14 issues of Sensational She-Hulk in 89-91, and then the Ultimates, Volume 1 and 2, 26 issues from 2002-2006. And he also had a run on Fantastic Four, issues 554 to 568 from 2008-2009. I guess the Ultimates would be his big claim to fame, right?
Well, you're not even mentioning the Authority. Have you heard of the Authority?
Did he create that, I believe? He
co-created the Authority, yes.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it, so I don't know.
It's hard to quickly explain. The Authority was it was done under Wildstorm Comics, and basically there was a comic called Stormwatch created by Jim Lee, and it was kind of just a generic X-Men, rip-off, right? And Warren Ellis from the UK took it over and slowly turned it into this bizarre comic, and then decided that it was different enough that he wanted to reboot it, so he recreated it as the Authority. And the Authority was kind of more realistic, more violent, more political than the comics were at the time. And Bryan Hitch's art was also evolving along the way. And Bryan Hitch ended up becoming this almost like the Neil Adams of his day. These very highly detailed, really realistic, depictions of gigantic widescreen images of, destruction and violence and stuff with these realistic superheroes. And what happened was, it was really critically acclaimed. It wasn't a huge seller, but it was critically acclaimed. And DC owned Wildstorm, and they were kind of always not really confident in the book itself. And also the two of the main characters were kind of like Superman and Batman doppelgangers, and they were gay. And obviously this was 1999, 2000. And so DC was a little bit, they were kind of shaky about the whole thing. And so they kind of just kiboshed it and just didn't really promote it. And eventually Marvel came in, scooped up all the talent. They scooped up Warren Ellis, Bryan Hitch, Mark Miller, and Frank Quitely from the Authority, and they just let them create the Ultimate line. And so that's where you get Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, and the Ultimates. And from there you get the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, most of the Marvel movies are based on the work from the Ultimate comics, and that's all based on the Authority. So it's kind of like, if you think about how important Watchmen was in '86, the Authority is probably the equivalent, but in like 1999.
Really? I never heard of it.
Really? Yeah, you
Never
should check it out for sure.
All right. See, I don't know. I'm looking at his art through the Ultimates and stuff. I'm not a huge fan. I don't like here in this Doctor Who. He's 18 years old, so I think it's fine. The art's fine. It's not terrible or anything, but it's a little flat and stiff. Yeah. And I think you still see that in his art. Like, when I'm looking at the Ultimate stuff, he still has a sense of it being flat to me and not dynamic.
Really?
Yes.
I just sent you an image on Facebook. Check it out, because that is an example of what I think is some of his, better stuff. But I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, our listeners can't see it. So anyway, but I'm sure anyone who listens to the show knows who Bryan Hitch is. So
yeah. See, I'm familiar with that image you showed me. Yeah, the composition's great and everything, but those figures are just stiff. And look at the arms, and I don't know. It just seems like it's bad image. Not bad, but image art from the early '90s. I'm
offended.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. But Miles, what did you think of the art in the Doctor Who?
I actually, the art, the internal art, when they're inside the body, it is what it is. It doesn't make an impression on me either way. I mean, it's colorful, which I always like, but there's nothing about it that's going to stick with me per se. I actually do like the art with Sylvester McCoy, and his facial expressions, I think, are very well rendered. And I kind of like the atmosphere of the sunset and everything that they're doing there. It's not, this didn't blow me away artistically, but I did kind of like, I think that when you're dealing with an 8-page comic that's kind of a scientific thing and it's cerebral, it's important to demonstrate that Sylvester, you only have a few panels with Sylvester McCoy even in it, right? So I kind of liked his facial expressions because they sort of show that he lands and he's in this state of doubt and he's unhappy, he's pissed off and talking to himself and he's doubting everything. And then towards the end, you start seeing that he feels better about himself because he was able to do some good. So I feel like that was conveyed.
Yeah, it feels good, especially for an 18-year-old. This is really good. What I mean? But but it's just not my kind of thing. But whatever. No, not a big deal. But maybe I'll read more Bryan Hitch. Maybe I'll read some Authority. But yeah, it just reminds me, his style is like that. Seems very Rob Liefeld.
Ooh.
Like early early Image comic art. Like the arm proportions are off, the head proportions are off a little bit. No. Yeah, I hate to break it to you, but they are.
He's known for his realism. He's known for his accuracy. Like,
the 2 images you sent me, I'll break them down for if you want to show you how the proportions are off. But maybe we'll do it off the air. But just measure the distance from Thor's top of the head to his eyes, the arms where they fall on the leg. They're off, bud. They're off. So I don't know. It just seems flat and not dynamic to me. But whatever.
Okay, now I'm going to send these to Miles later, and then we'll talk. But anyway.
Yeah, I'll be happy to break it down with you.
All right.
From an art, right? But all right, so let's get into Grant Morrison again.
Sure.
You mentioned basically all the stuff I had written down about what he had done, but he was born in 1960 in Glasgow, Scotland. He did a lot of early anthology stuff. And you mentioned you love Animal Man, right, Michael?
Absolutely, yeah. Love it.
Miles, have you ever heard of Animal Man?
I have not.
Yeah, no one has, except for Mike L. Then he did Doom Patrol. And have you watched that TV show, Michael?
You know, it's funny. I have not. No. As soon as I found out it wasn't a word-for-word adaptation of Grant Morrison's work, I just lost all interest.
And can you explain the Invisibles? Can you sum up the Invisibles from 94 to 2000? He did that. And this is a very pivotal comic in his life, the Invisibles. I'll get into that in a minute.
Well, I can just say that it's basically the Matrix, but more mystical. It's because, and when I say that, it's literally the Matrix, because apparently the Matrix ripped it off, but who knows if that's actually true or not. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. The Matrix was after that. And then, like you said, he did the new X-Men from 2001, 2004. But here's the thing we got to talk about with Grant Morrison. All right, Miles, listen up. This is interesting. He is way into sigil magic, chaos magic, some people call it. Miles, have you have any history of sigil magic or chaos magic?
Chaos magic I have heard of.
Yeah. Well, basically, a sigil is just a fancy word for a symbol, and it's all about focusing your intent. So to create a sigil, you write down a phrase. Sometimes people say, "It is my will that," and then they write it down. And then after you write your phrase down on the paper, you take out all the vowels, so you reduce it just to the consonants, and then you create a symbol using those consonants. You just write the letters over top of each other until you just keep redoing it, revising it until you get a symbol that that resonates with you, and then you focus all your intent into that sigil. And there are different ways you can charge it. And one of the big ways you charge a sigil in chaos magic is by jerking off.
What?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a form of sex magic, ritualistic sex magic. Some other people, there's other ways you can burn it, do other stuff. But basically, you just want to focus on that sigil, and it will change your life. And so Grant Morrison, he came upon all this really back in 1994. He was in Kathmandu, and he was on top of a hotel in Kathmandu, and he's really high, and he said he was abducted by aliens. And they told him what life was all about and what reality really is, and that we're all basically living in somewhat of a simulated reality, where we're just here harvesting, growing as a group consciousness, and they harvest basically the energy and stuff off of it. We're basically like a science project for these aliens. And these aliens are like blobs. And he gets into great detail about this at a lecture he gave at the DisinfoCon back in 2000. Or you guys are familiar with Disinfo? It's no longer around, but it was a website about the under subculture and just kind of interesting esoteric kind of things they would get into. But go Google up Grant Morrison DisinfoCon speech. It's quite the speech that he gives when he talks all about this stuff. And basically, the Invisibles was a living sigil. Like he made it an ongoing sigil comic book. So he said he basically controlled his life. Like when he created a character for himself in the book, and when things happen to the character in the book, they happen to him in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Deeper and deeper.
Yeah, he's a fascinating fellow, this Grant Morrison. So, yeah, I would highly recommend everyone look into him. It's great stuff.
I am going to study this because this sounds like a colorful gentleman.
Yeah, because basically what they're doing here with the chaos magic is essentially they think they can shape their reality, because if we're living in a simulated reality or quantum physics and quantum mechanics and all that, the observer effect, and if you really focus, you can shape your reality. So they figure that their magical rituals and the sigil magic, it's a way of hacking the program, basically. And you can control things. So, and he swears by it. He swears by it. And now, because there's different levels of, different branches, I should say, of mysticism and magic. You have the Aleister Crowley and the Thelema, or Thelema, however they say it. Then you have the chaos magic people. Now, the Aleister Crowley part, they're the guys that run the world and the U.S. government. They're all throughout the U.S. government. So the chaos magic is kind of like the younger branch of the people who like to jerk off. So Alan Moore would be more Aleister Crowley-ish, and Grant Morrison is more chaos magic. So that's why they butt heads.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So there you go.
Because Aleister Crowley, ended up so well.
Yes.
He clearly runs the world.
Yes, he does. So there you go. That's your Grant Morrison. But again, Disinfo lecture from 2000. Grant Morrison. Fascinating stuff. All right. So anything else about Grant Morrison you'd like to say, Michael?
Only that I love his writing. I mean, he's not quite as good now as he used to be, but yeah, I guess if you're interested, I'd recommend The Invisibles, The Doom Patrol, Animal Man, and All-Star Superman. Those are the best ones, probably.
Well, there you go. Any final thoughts on Doctor Who?
I say, Mike Dell, you should check out Doctor Who.
Fucking way.
I was actually thinking, if you were to watch one classic story, and Miles, I'm sure you might have a suggestion, but I'd probably suggest Tomb of the Cybermen. That's a nice little self-contained story that I would recommend.
Tomb of the Cybermen. Miles Watson, are you familiar with that story?
A little bit. That's from a doctor that's a little before my time. As far as like I'm familiar a little with John Pertwee's doctor, with Peter Davidson's doctor, and so forth. But Tom Baker is the one I have expertise on. From the Tom Baker era, I would strongly recommend Genesis of the Daleks, The Talons of Weng Chiang. Those are both terrific stories that are really, really, really well done. Horror of Fang Rock is a really good one if you want to understand what the series is about in about 90 minutes. That's a good one. It's got horror, it's got great writing. The effects aren't really an issue because it's a period piece.
All right.
I mean, it's Doctor Who is like. I would liken it to, it's an extremely acquired taste. You either get it or you don't. If you don't get it, there's probably not much. I mean, if and when I say don't get it, I'm not being condescending. I'm saying it's like artistic tastes vary. Yeah. And to me, it's like, some people like Star Wars, some people like Star Trek, some people like Babylon 5 or Red Dwarf, or, like some people like Isaac Asimov. His writing, it all basically boils down to what you want out of this particular genre of, science fiction. I guess Doctor Who is basically science fiction, although it's really, the science in Doctor Who is trash. It's not it's not realistic. It's Doctor Who has really always been about this rebel anarchist who's an underdog. He fights for the underdog. I mean, that's really what the show's about, and a lot of it's allegorical. The other thing really talking about the working class, or the British ruling class, or imperialism, or technology, that kind of thing.
The other thing we should mention is the Doctor is always accompanied by companions on his journeys. Yeah. They're usually human companions, and that just gives me a reason to mention Jenna Coleman. If I'm going to watch Doctor Who, I will watch a Jenna Coleman episode of Doctor Who, but. I really don't think I'm going to do any further interacting with the Doctor. I think this is it. So.
I just have a question. How did you even come across Jenna Coleman?
Oh, you don't worry how I came across Jenna Coleman. You don't worry about that.
She's my favorite too, absolutely.
Miles, do you have a favorite Doctor Who companion?
As an actress, I gradually came to really, really like Liz Sladen, but if you are looking for a Doctor Who companion from the Tom Baker era, I would suggest Louise Jameson.
Louise Jameson. All right.
Yeah. She was beautiful, and she dressed on the show in about animal skins.
Yes. I remember her.
Huh.
Yeah. She admitted, the actress admitted herself, she was like, my character is for the dads that have to watch this show with their children.
Yeah, hey now. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
She's like, I have to give something, they've got to give the dads something to look at.
Nice British accent. Yeah, all right. Yeah,
she was realistic.
Thanks to Google, I've now learned about Louise Jameson, and I thumbs up on that. Yeah, so.
What about the character Joe Grant? Miles, you a fan?
Grant. Yeah, that was from John Pertwee's era. She was cute, but in a kind of like, it depends on your taste in, women.
Yeah.
But because the Doctor Who ran the way it did, through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s, you see the changes in fashion.
Totally, yeah.
And then some, So it's like you see the hair changes, you see the kind of body changes as far as like, the Gidget thing or whatever was big where women had pixie hair and all that stuff. You see the 80s. So it's like it really depends on if you look at like a certain era of film or what have you.
Sure.
And those women, like the girls in the Hammer horror movies, appeal to you.
Right.
It's, you know what I mean? Like you're definitely going to have your own personal taste as far as that's going to go, because like this is a show that spanned numerous decades.
Mm. This is true.
Doctor Who.
So Joe Grant, to me, I guess what I meant to say by that was that Joe Grant is a character that is very reflective of the like
of what was
very early 70s,
right,
where the 60s are still there. Like kind of the way every decade carries over into the next decade. Because I think she was from like the very early 70s period.
Yes. Yeah, so she kind of looked like, I don't want to say Twiggy, but kind of like someone that would hang out,
Twiggy, that's what I meant,
Doctor Who or someone, or with David Bowie or somebody,
That's exactly what I meant. I didn't mean Gidget. I meant Twiggy.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that. Yeah, okay.
Well, that was the popular look for women, especially in Britain, but really everywhere during that period of like, what was that, like 68, 9, something like that. It transitioned from sort of the beach bunny look to this kind of very skinny girl with crop hair, I'm trying to get a visual image, but it's something along those lines. I'm not an expert on that period, and I'm clearly showing it by what I'm saying right now. But
it's all right.
I think we're torturing Mike Dell here. So
yeah, you've already proven that you're an expert on the Doctor Who, Miles. No more
that's
needed.
payment in itself.
Well, next week on the show, Michael,
woo,
we're going to get back to punching people.
Uh-oh.
So we're going to go Defenders issue 18 from 1974.
No way.
And this is the first full appearance of the Wrecking Crew.
Really?
Them guys, the Wrecker and his crew.
I remember the Wrecking Crew, absolutely.
Miles, are you familiar with the Wrecking Crew?
Yes.
Yeah.
By reputation.
Absolutely. So Defenders 18, 1974. Len Wein wrote it, and I believe our buddy Sal Buscema drew it. So classic punching people.
Nice.
Next week. Can't wait. So Miles Watson, thanks so much for sharing your Doctor Who knowledge.
I'm happy to share it. It's a little again. I'm a little specific and a lot dated, but I did know what TARDIS stood for. So
yes, you did. Yes, you did.
So I proved that I am not completely useless.
And go to 19books.com or Amazon and just search for Miles Watson and buy all his books.
I noticed that there was a silence after I said I'm not completely useless, but I'm going to ignore that.
Yeah. I was waiting for Mike Dell to.
It's kind of implied.
Yeah.
But next time you're on the big show, Miles, we'll let you pick something that's good where people get punched.
I have at least 2 or 3 ideas that are jumping to mind. So
all right,
I look forward to my third appearance.
Yeah, if you get to 5, we'll give you a smoking jacket. So
I'll take it.
All right.
All right,
Michael.
Just to wear the jacket.
Yeah, you got to. So, all right, Michael.
That wraps it up then, eh?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this, Michael. I really appreciate the Doctor Who.
And I appreciate Miles, suffering through the technical difficulties we had.
I forgot. We didn't give it a 1 to 10 rating, Michael.
Oh, geez. Hold on. Stop everything.
Yeah.
Okay,
Miles, what would you rate this book or the 8-page story, 1 to 10?
I'd give it like a 7.5.
Wow. All right, 7.5.
Something like that. I don't. Something in that area. Yeah.
Michael?
I would. To be honest, I would give the story at least an 8. And the art's not great, so I'll give the art like maybe a 5 or 6. So it probably averages out to about a 7.
I'd give it a 5. It's fine. It's I don't know. The story's okay, but it's not like it was real. I know Michael was trying to sell that you didn't know what was happening or you had to be revealed. It was pretty clear right from the start what was happening.
Of course, but it was still fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
It's, again, the limitation of 8 pages.
Yeah, it is what it is. You know, it's not going to be a masterpiece. It's fine. So I give it a nice neutral 5. But, so there you go. All right, Michael. So now you can wrap it up.
Yeah, okay, so I guess that wraps up the latest episode of Flea Market Fantasy, your favorite Bronze Age comic book podcast, produced by two guys whose first name is Mike and whose middle name is Paul. This has been
That's right.
Flea Market Fantasy. See you next time.
Michael, you forgot your catchphrase. How many weeks in a row are you going to forget your catchphrase?
Here we go. Disperse.
There, finally.